This is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 467th edition of Tranquility du Jour, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Tranquility du Jour is a series of nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. Sign up for Love Notes to get exclusive content, personal updates, and giveaways not shared anywhere else, and also to access Tranquil Treasures, an assortment of PDFs, MP3s, videos, and more. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcast or Overcast, and visit KimberlyWilson.com/podcast for more episodes and the Tranquility du Jour podcast app. Share a review over on iTunes or Amazon, and you may hear it shared on the show. So the latest one for the podcast is I love listening to these useful, cheerful podcasts. They give me good ideas and remind me I'm not alone. Anonymous277, thank you so much for sharing this. I really appreciate it, and I'm delighted that you find these useful. And finally, please share your takeaways using hashtag TDJPodcast and tag me at Tranquility du Jour. In this week's edition of Tranquility du Jour, I chat crystals with Tiffany Williams. Learn the basics of crystals, which ones to start with, and the benefits of working with them. For those of you who are local, on October 27th, Pigs and Pugs Project, which is a nonprofit that I'm the president of, is offering Pugs and Pints, a fun event at a local brewery, and would love to have you join us. And if you can't join, there is an in-spirit ticket option. New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, I'm hosting retreat offerings here in Washington, D.C., and would love to have you with us. Without further ado, our featured guest, Tiffany, is a certified yoga teacher, and she specializes in slow flow Vinyasa classes that have been described as slow and strong, Yin and Restorative yoga. She is known for her calming presence, ability to hold space for others to express strong emotion, her honesty, thoughtful questioning leading one deeper into oneself, and inviting the divine into the everyday. In addition to her group classes and private yoga sessions, she leads yoga and crystal workshops, goddess circles, and produces custom ceremonies for healing, releasing, and celebrating spiritual transitions. You can find Tiffany at tiffanyreneewilliams.com. Renee is R-E-N-A-E. And there's a link, of course, in the show notes, KimberlyWilson.com/467. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hi.
So tell us, how did you get into crystals?
So like so many things, I feel like the best answer is I kind of stumbled into it. So a few years ago, I live in Alexandria, and there was a market, a street fair. And there was a crystal seller there, and I was just drawn to them. I was really interested, walked around, left them, then decided, no, I needed some. I had to take them home. I couldn't leave without having them. So I ended up going back to that booth for amethyst and for chalcedonies. So for any of your listeners who are unfamiliar, amethyst is probably the most popular crystal, like lavender to essential oils. I call amethyst very affectionately the lavender of crystals, because even if you're not into crystals, you have seen amethyst. So amethyst is connected with the third eye and intuition, and chalcedony is this really beautiful light blue stone, sometimes called the speaker stone. And they were just so fitting because at the time I attended that fair and saw the crystals, I was coming out of a rough time in my life where I had lost my voice, lost my connection to myself. So it was fitting that those were the two stones that kind of were calling me. But when I was thinking about this call, I realized that actually I've been interested in crystals for much longer, in the same way that most people are familiar with crystals as jewelry. So when they're polished and they're faceted, they're gemstones. And I'd always been attracted to accessories in school and studying art history, the symbolism behind them. In graduate school, I studied 20th century French jewelry. So it's been many, many years, a good part of my life. But if I were to speak solely about crystals in the raw, I would go back to that time several years ago at that fair when I left with those two crystals.
And so tell me a little bit, just kind of background. So what do you do professionally that kind of ties in with this? Because I always find it fascinating, people who are drawn to certain things, because I think it's often like there's an image of what type of person works with crystals, and yet it's the gamut, right? And so I'm curious a little bit about you and kind of your professional persona.
Sure. So I went to school first for fashion and then for art history. And so by day, I am a full-time art curator working in contemporary art. A while ago, several years ago, I recommitted myself to yoga. I'd found yoga in high school and practiced some in college and kept going back to it outside of college. But a few years ago, decided to really recommit, meaning I was practicing at home. I was going several times a week to a studio. I found a teacher I really liked. And then over a year ago, I started teaching yoga. And through my own, going to that fair, finding the crystals, I started working with crystals in my own personal life just through meditation, and then started bringing them to my yoga classes when I would practice, then to my yoga classes when I would teach, and make, crystal grids or do crystal offerings for students in my classes.
Yeah, so tell us, what is a crystal grid? Because I've heard you mention that before, and I wasn't familiar with that.
So crystal grids are wonderful ways that you can use a multitude of crystals sort of to make a grid. You could think of it as a map, but basically it's a variety of crystals in certain configurations that make literally a grid that you can use to sort of help guide your meditations, to help focus your mind. You can use them in practices for sort of manifestation. If you believe in that, I believe in that. But you can use them for those things. So I like to think of crystal gridding as a way to help focus the mind, a way to meditate, a way to help you manifest, and a way to tap into your intuition.
Very cool. And so, my next question is really like, what do you do with crystals? And so I guess that kind of touches on that, but can you share a little bit more?
Sure. So with crystals, I use crystals in a variety of ways. So, I've mentioned in my yoga classes, in my own practice. So I use crystals to help me meditate. So if there's my morning meditation practice, something I want to focus on, maybe that's self-love or giving love to someone else, I might work with a crystal that's associated with the heart chakra, for example, or your heart space. A very common crystal for that is rose quartz. I also use crystals to help calm me down. So some people are already familiar with what they might call worry stones. So beautifully polished, soft, smooth, sometimes very thin stones that one can keep in a pocket, your pants pocket, a dress pocket, that's just with you, that you carry around. And when you find yourself worrying about something or thinking about a particular thing, you reach in your pocket and you find the stone, and it can help bring some calming. So I don't personally work with calming stones in that way, that they have to be in that very smooth, polished way. But I know many people who might say they weren't familiar with crystals are familiar with worry stones. And then I also use crystals to help protect me from different energies. So there are some stones that are really great at absorbing negative energy. So black tourmaline is a stone I've been working with a lot lately that helps to pull in and absorb negative energy around you. So this is a stone I might take to the office, for example. So I use them in these different ways, meditating to calm me, for protection. I use them in classes as offerings. If a student comes into my class and it seems like they could really use some love, or maybe they are really fidgety and they need some grounding, I might use a stone with them, either in their hands or around their mat, to help with that.
And one of the things you mentioned, kind of like worry stones, right? So one of the questions I have is about shape and size. And, so right, there's smooth ones or rough ones. And I got rose quartz for all the ladies who came to TDJ Soiree this summer. And, I debated between the smooth ones or the rough ones. And there was just something about the rough, it felt more authentic. But I'm curious, what do you recommend, and how do we decide between shape, size, and rough or smooth?
Right. So I am someone who will always say, go with your intuition. So that's what I would say here. So for me personally, I like you just mentioned, I like to work with stones that are not tumbled. So meaning stones that are not necessarily polished. I like feeling the more sort of raw roughness, seeing how clearly they are from the earth. I like being reminded of that. That helps me. But I know some people, like I mentioned, like to carry them in pockets, don't want them, to snag fabrics, things like that. And that's fine too. So I would say if you're torn between one stone, rough and raw versus tumbled, I would say sit with them in either hand and then just see which one feels better and then go from there. It really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is tap into your own vibration, your own connection with the stone. So rough or tumbled, it carries the same energy with it.
Yeah, so there's not really a preference among connoisseurs, is there?
Yeah, but I will say this. There are stones that are pointed at the end. So those stones are really helpful if you are trying to sort of gather and focus energy. So often you'll see clear quartz that is terminated in a point, and people will hold these in their hands when they're meditating or in a grid. And practitioners who work with crystals will say this helps to focus and channel the energy to that point. So if you do work with crystal grids, you may often see crystals that are crystal chunks, but pointing maybe in the direction of certain stones or at the center, or you may see crystal towers that are pointed. They look like multi-sided pyramids that are pointed, and that's the reason for that, because they gather the energy and then channel the energy up and out.
Gotcha. I'm looking at one in front of me, a rose quartz, and I'm like, oh, there is a point. So, yeah. Now, which ones are good to start with? Now, of course, you mentioned amethyst, which is interesting. I don't know why I would have just thought rose quartz, but can you tell us, like, if you were to get a starter kit of sorts, these are the ones you must have.
Right. So, again, I'll go back to intuition to start with. And then I'll give very specifically some ones that if you aren't sure what your intuition is telling you where to start. But always I say go with your intuition. So I'll hear often people say, oh, I don't know why, but I was just drawn to this stone, this color, kept calling me, or I saw this somewhere and it was like jumping out at me and I didn't know if I should get it. My answer to that is you absolutely should, because for whatever reason it's calling to you, then have the stone, and when you work with it and start to research it on your own, you'll come to find, maybe there's a connection with what you are going through that the stone can help you work with. So that would be my first thing. The next thing I might say is, if you already work with the chakras in some way, you can pick stones based on your chakras. Color association is a great place to start. But if you really have no idea where to start and you're like, I just want to buy some already, what do I do? There are a few that I would suggest. Clear quartz. I think it's very common, can find it everywhere, but it's very powerful. It's when I think that people who want to start working with crystals have a very quick association with, they can feel comfortable with. So clear quartz is used to help amplify any other energies around it. So it works with any of the other stones that you get. You can grid with it. It's like a multi-purpose stone, I would say. I would also say amethyst, because it helps tap into your intuition, which throughout the course of this talk, I think it's clear. I think a lot of us need to do that more, to listen to our own self, what we are saying. That silent voice inside of us is trying to be heard. So I would say amethyst is a great one. Citrine is a really beautiful yellow stone that is associated with the solar plexus, so the space in your body that amplifies your personal power. It helps to boost confidence. That's a great one to have with you and start working with. As I mentioned, I'm a huge, huge fan of black tourmaline. You know, it absorbs negative energy. I don't know anyone who would say they don't need that in their lives. And then I would also say selenite. So selenite is often found in these long rectangular forms, kind of wand-like, and it's a great stone to help brush off other people's energies off of you. So I like to say you can kind of brush yourself or wand yourself with a selenite wand, and it just helps clear other people's energy off of you so you can get back to yourself. So those are the ones that if someone said, I have no idea where to start, I would start with those. And as you mentioned, rose quartz is really popular right now. That's another great stone to work with, particularly if you're working on self-love and self-compassion.
And, you know, the thing about it is, like, I remember 20 years ago with like feng shui, it being like something like, oh, and you should have it in your bedroom because it helps with love. Or I don't know if there's like a place you're supposed to put them in your home.
So there are so many books on that. And I will say, I'm still not done reading them all. But I will say, yes, I would put rose quartz in my bedroom and in my bathroom. Any sort of like self-care baths you're doing, you know, with flowers or essential oils, it's a great place for those. I would put black tourmaline at the entrance of my front door. You can also put it in each corner of the home just to help ground and protect the space. Some other stones that you can work with in certain rooms are, for example, the chalcedony that I mentioned earlier. I like to keep that in my bedroom by my on my nightstand. It's just a nice, calming, soothing stone. I have a funny story. My mom, who I've recently got into crystals, did this whole, you know, crystal binge, and she got all of these stones, one of which was garnet, and she had it in her room on her nightstand for whatever reason, and she fell asleep with it. And the next day she told me she had dreams about something was very bloody in her dream, and she likened that to having the garnet on her nightstand, and it really sort of bothered her. So anyway, she got rid of it and sent it to me. So I will say, I think to your point, there is something about having certain stones in certain places in your home, especially if you're very tapped into or in tune with different crystals.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know, because I figured there was something helpful with regard to placement or, you know, what have you. So I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about some of the benefits that you've experienced, or even maybe some of the benefits that your clients or people that you know have experienced and shared with you?
Yeah, I found crystals really healing and helpful in terms of getting over some past trauma. So I was in a really unhealthy relationship for several years, and through yoga and through breath work and through crystals, I found a lot of peace and a centeredness through that. Um, even just very, I was going to say superficially, but I don't think it's superficial. Even just visually, crystals are so beautiful. And I think there is something to having beauty in your space and around you, much like having fresh flowers, much like having beautiful fabrics, in your home that you wear. I think that we don't give enough credit to seeing beautiful things and their effect on our peace of mind. There's an artist that I've worked with before who, and I'm paraphrasing, it's a beautiful quote, and I will just admit I'm paraphrasing right now. His name is Theaster Gates. And in one of his talks that I saw, someone asked him, about beauty, and he said, I don't think beauty is a luxury. I think beauty is a basic human right. And I thought that was so powerful because there's no monopoly, I don't believe, on who should be able to see and who should be able to experience beauty, especially natural beauty, things found in nature like crystals.
One of the things too, you just mentioned they're found in nature. I think a lot of people are like, where do crystals come from? So can you explain, like, are there like rose quartz spots where this is where you go and get rose quartz? This is where you go to get amethyst.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. There are places all over the world. I think some people don't even realize that in the United States, there are a lot of places to find crystals. For example, most people, if you've gone to Arizona, know like, oh, I can find turquoise there. And they don't associate it with being a crystal or stone that you can work with, I think often because it's found in jewelry. So that's something that I would really challenge people to think about, that actually, even if you feel unfamiliar with crystals, you have some relationship to crystals if you wear jewelry with any sort of gemstone. So I would just say that. There's a lot of places you can research online about where you can find certain crystals. All over South America, you can find beautiful opals and emeralds, topaz. All over Africa, the same. So it's really interesting, and there are some really interesting and illuminating maps you can find with a quick Google search about where certain crystals are found. And many crystals are found in multiple places, which gives you a different variety of colors, of different strains, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I remember hiking in the hills, and we would find quartz a lot. And then it was funny as I got older, and I'm like, oh my gosh, people buy this stuff, and they actually, and it's like used for things besides, doorstops or putting on a bookshelf. I had no idea. I just thought they were pretty stones. So tell us a little bit about charging a crystal.
I love that you asked that, because that is a question I get a lot of the time. So you can call it charging, or you can call it cleansing or clearing. I find that these terms are used interchangeably all the time. But the premise of charging, cleansing, or clearing is to prepare your crystals to be worked with. So if you get a stone, maybe you bought it off the internet, or you bought it at a crystal shop, maybe you don't know exactly where it came from, so you don't know if it's prepared or already cleansed of any other energy. You can cleanse or clear it to prepare to work with it. Same thing if you've been working with the crystal for a long time and you don't feel like it's as potent or you're getting the same effects, it just needs a little refresh, you can cleanse or clear it. So some of the ways you can do that are using water is one way. So you can prepare crystals or clear crystals in ocean water, in salt water even that you make at home. If you don't have that, running water is fine. You can also use the energy of the moon. So keeping crystals out in the moonlight, particularly the light of the full moon. It's very clearing energy. And then often you can find people on the internet in visual spaces like Instagram, clearing or charging crystals with sage or Palo Santo. I would just say that while that's beautiful and they smell wonderful, sage and Palo Santo, I would just be mindful that there's a lot of unethical and unsustainable methods of gathering those two materials right now because they are so popular that it's damaging, particularly with Palo Santo trees. It's eliminating much of the population of the trees. So if you already have purchased those things, you can, feel free to use them, but just, I would say, be mindful of the practices of how those are being received. And there are some more sustainable ways, like the light of the moon and water clearings, ocean water, where you can clear and charge your crystals.
Yeah, because I remember whenever I recently bought some crystals, the guy was like, "Would you like me to clear them?" And I'm like, okay. I didn't really know kind of the why behind it, but it seemed like something I should say yes to.
Mm-hmm. How did he do it?
I think with sage, because it was I'm pretty sure it was sage. It was in a crystal shop in Colorado.
Nice. Yeah, and I've seen, you can obviously grow your own sage, but I've seen people using less sage and more flowers now in different bundles. So I personally have sage and Palo Santo in my home right now that I've previously bought. I just wanted to bring to light that sometimes that's not sustainable. And often I find when people work with crystals, they're wanting to bring about positive energy. They're wanting to do something mindful, have a mindful practice. So I just want people to also know there's a mindful way that you can clear crystals.
Yeah, no, that's great to know. And it's also good to know kind of the using the moonlight or, things along those lines that I think, it's, I don't know, not to say it's more natural, but it's like, it's absorbing kind of pieces of nature.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, which crystals help with anxiety, right? So I'm curious for like certain ailments, or issues or struggles that we have. And you even mentioned kind of getting into these with regard to healing from trauma. So are there any that you're like, okay, this is great for this, and this one's supposed to be great for this?
Yeah, so there are a few. So of the ones I've mentioned before, I'll just start with black tourmaline because I love it. So it's like the primer stone for protection. It helps put out an energetic boundary between you and other people. And as I mentioned, you can place it, by your front door. I have it in my office cube. It just creates sort of a shield of protection around you. And I think if you have anxiety, protecting yourself from other people's energy is a great place to start. Another stone that I really like working with is fluorite. So it helps create a state of relaxation. It can also really help you focus. I found that personally through working with it. It's another stone I've taken to work. It helps to neutralize negative energy. It can be inspiring. It can create clarity, peace, and harmony. So fluorite is a stone I really like to work with. And if you have it tumbled, it's easy to find a fluorite stone that's tumbled. You can carry it in your pocket. It's nice to take with you. I would also say blue lace agate. It's this really beautiful light blue stone. It has these white striations in it. It's very calming and soothing to the mind. It can help encourage you to speak your truth. That's one that you can meditate with, really hold in your hands, close your eyes, do a breathing practice, even just 3 to 5 deep breaths. Holding the stone is very soothing and calming to the body.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Yeah, it's great what about for travel, for flying anxiety? Would that be the same thing?
Yeah, so you can use any of those. Turquoise actually is also a really great stone to have and travel with. It's supposed to be good luck for travel.
Okay, good. Now, what are some resources, Tiffany, that you're like, these are your go-tos? Check these out, whether or not they're books or, Instagram accounts or websites. Is there anything that you really love and recommend?
Yeah, so I found this book much later in my journey with crystals, and I had wished I found it sooner, but there's this really great book. It's actually called Crystals for Beginners, so very easy to Google, by a woman named Karen Fraser. So it's Crystals for Beginners, the guide to get started with the healing powers of crystals. And what I love about it is that it's full color. It breaks it down by chakras. It breaks it down by working with crystals through color. It talks about gridding. It talks about starter kits. So if you're looking for sort of a one-size-fits-all primer to get started, that's the book that I would go to. I also talk about crystals a lot on my own Instagram platform. And there's another woman, the woman that I started working with. Her name is Tyler, but her Instagram is Heart Abundance. And she has this beautiful Instagram. It's full of crystals. And each week she does a crystal scope. So she will identify, a crystal for each day of the week and sort of give you a guide of what's to come, what each crystal means, and then these beautiful journaling prompts. That's every Monday. That's Heart Abundant. It's heart.abundance on Instagram.
Great. Thank you. These are great resources. And it's always nice to know, okay, what's a wonderful, just kind of launching off point? There's so many resources out there. So it's nice to know what you recommend.
Yeah, I love them. And I think, you can find a lot on Instagram just by searching hashtags, but that's the one that I would start with because it's just, I think it breaks it down. It's very clear. It's a very, guided resource. And then the book is just wonderful because it's a little bit of everything to help you get started.
Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners on getting started with crystals, healing with crystals, etc.?
So I would just reiterate the importance of listening to your own intuition. So I came to crystals, as I mentioned, after, my own traumatic experience, and I had really gotten away from myself, from listening to myself. And what I found, even through, my yoga teacher training, through breath work, through finding a spiritual community, to coming to crystals, is we intuitively have so much information inside of us that if we listen to ourselves, if we get quiet and still with ourselves, it will really help guide us. So if you don't get the book, if you don't, research crystals online, if you just happen to be out somewhere and you find one that's calling to you, I would say just give it a try and know that you don't need anyone else, me or otherwise, telling you this is the crystal for you. If you're drawn to it, then act on that and then see where that takes you. So I would say listen to yourself.
And my last question for you, Tiffany, is the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
I find tranquility every day in the morning. I was thinking of you actually because today marks my first full week without coffee. And I have been taking the mornings. I used to take the mornings quietly for coffee, and now I take them quietly for tea. And it often reminds me of being with you in your own space, that you always have tea. So I start my day by myself, in quiet, with my tea. I open my blinds, and I just take 5 minutes or so looking at the trees, listening to the birds, like just getting quiet again in the waking state before I start my day.
I love that. I love that you're transitioning to tea.
I've transitioned, yes.
It's a whole new world, honey.
It is a whole new world. So many flavors.
So many. So many. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany, for being here and for sharing your insights, because I know this is a super hot topic now, and so I was really excited to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Savvy Sources. You can find Tiffany over on Instagram and on Twitter. There's links to that in the show notes. There's also links to the Instagram account that Tiffany mentioned that she finds inspiring, and also the book she mentioned, Crystals for Beginners by Karen Fraser. Let's stay connected. You can browse my 6 books, eye candy on Instagram, follow along on Facebook, watch YouTube, including the new series, Tea with Kimberly, and then also shop seasonless, vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion, Tranquility. Thank you guys so much for being here and supporting Tranquility du Jour for 14 years now. Wishing you a delightful week ahead. Namaste.